This is putting the C in CLT projects, all right? So what we're going to talk about, just to be clear, because what's in the program isn't quite accurate, I'm going to talk about community gardens. I'm going to talk a bit about condominiums, co-housing, housing co-ops, community pubs, or a community pub, and then kind of trying to tie things together at the end. I apologize, it's probably going to be kind of heavy on the lecture and light on the audience participation. So, no, oh, and you can interrupt me at any time, all right? And it's exciting for me to be here because I haven't taught at a CLT conference since way before the pandemic. I've taught some online, but this is way better. So thanks for coming here. All right, so about me. So I've been working on and off with Community Land Trust since 1991, which is a long, long time. I am the coordinator for the Center for CLT Innovation, which I'll tell you about in a second. And I came to doing work with condos, co-housing, and community gardens through my work with Madison Area Community Land Trust. I know a little bit about housing cooperatives, but not that much. So you could ask me questions, but I won't pretend to be an expert. But I did do some work with folks at the California CLT Network who were developing a model co-op ground lease. So I know a little bit about that. And my background is as a lawyer, social worker, and lead AP, and I draw on all those skills all the time. All right, so the Center for CLT Innovation. So first of all, who's heard of that organization? Who knew about it before the conference started? All right, all right. Well, we were founded in 2018 to promote and support CLTs and similar strategies of community-led development, community-owned land around the world. So it was kind of an absurdly large mission, in particular because it was a 100% volunteer effort when we got started. It grew out of a website called Roots and Branches. Has anybody been to that? It's our digital archive of the CLT movement. And our founding was inspired by one of the best, most amazing CLTs in the world, the Caño Martin Peña CLT in Puerto Rico. Who's heard of that? Oh, you got to check them out. They are unbelievable. We have information about them on our website. And we identified there was a need for an organization with an explicit international focus to support the work of CLTs. So wherever you were in the world, there was a website you can go and get helpful information. By our estimate, our current number is 624 active CLTs around the world, with 333 in the US. And we maintain what we think is the definitive global map and directory of CLTs. We publish books, so you might have seen me at a table. Marketing books. We're much better at publishing than we are at marketing, but we're working on that. On Common Ground is a book that we did that was a successor to the CLT Reader that hopefully some of you have read, and that was geared explicitly for an international audience. And then we also translated it into Spanish as well. And then just, I'll get to that in a sec. Here's a snippet from our website. So we have a lot of information on our website, probably too much. If you go to our website, you have questions you can't find the answers to, just go to the contact form, send me an email, and I'll follow up with you. We present webinars, not so much this year, but we're going to be much more active on that next year. And we organize World CLT Day. Anybody here hear of World CLT Day? All right, all right. Here's our board of directors. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but there'll be some names you might recognize. John Davis is our co-president. Brenda Torpy, former executive director of Champlain Housing Trust. We've got Dudley represented with Harry Smith. We've got folks from around the world representing London CLT, folks in Brazil, Puerto Rico, Belgium, France, etc. So here's some of the projects that we're doing that might be of interest to you. We published this book on Tuesday. And this is a book of interviews with elders of the CLT movement. You might recognize some of these names. Some of them you may not. Gus Newport, we were very fortunate to interview him before he died a couple months ago. So we're very grateful for that. So we'll be sending out an email to our email list. Hopefully some of you are on it. And we encourage you to check it out. You can always find it on Amazon. But probably not till next week or the week after. Anybody recognize this publication? Show of hands. This is great when you're talking to city government, county government. People have been using it pretty extensively since 2008. It's now outdated, so we're doing a revised version of this in collaboration with the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy. And you'll be seeing a survey we're going to be sending to all the CLTs in the U.S. to gather background information about it. Survey won't require you to do any research, and it's something that you could answer off the top of your head, so stay tuned for that. We're really excited about this project, which is launching next month, and it's our CLT Legal Collaborative. We're going to be working with a consortium of 8 to 10 law school clinical programs around the U.S. and in Puerto Rico to provide support to them in their work with community land trusts. And then in 2025, we'll be really digging into our work, organizing a network of practicing attorneys who work with CLTs as well. And as some of you may know, when you're breaking in a new CLT attorney, you train them while you're paying them their hourly rate. And that's nuts. It's expensive, it's a waste. And so we're hoping to provide resources to attorneys new to CLT so you don't have to train them and pay them for the privilege of being trained. This is a project that we're excited about. We're calling it right now the CLT 2030 Project. Which will be a global initiative to support a just transition to low-carbon economies and the role CLTs can play about that. And so we'll have more information to share with you in 2024. And World CLT Day, if you want to put it on your calendar, will be May 17 and 18. We should call it days, but we're doing it so it's a Friday and a Saturday in case folks want to do community events on a Saturday. And we'll be working in partnership with all the national and regional CLT networks, so stay tuned for that. All right, before we get started, I just want to pose 2 questions for you to keep in mind. First of all, how do we push towards the simplest solutions? All right, and you may have noticed when you work with attorneys, they like complexity because their brains are attracted to it and it's good for business, right? So how can you do what you want and boil it down to the simplest possible framework? All right, and then the other thing is why bother? Right, that's an essential question for CLTs. It's not the simplest model to implement, as you all know. And so being able to answer the question why bother is really important. And in some of these models that I'm going to talk about today, which add an additional layer of complexity, you always want to be able to answer the question, why is this important? Why is it worth the effort? And in terms of some of the themes that we'll be touching on here, one is working with elders, another is accessible design, participatory planning, being open to things going in unexpected directions, which you'll certainly see when we talk about the community pub, learning from our mistakes, and the importance of these places, these things that we call third places. And third places are places where community happens. And it could be a neighborhood bar, it could be a church, and it could be a community garden. So how can we facilitate community in the projects that we do? We could do it through legal structures, social overlays on top of those structures. We could do it through things that are complex to implement, and we might decide, I don't know if it's worth it, but we can get 75% of the way there doing something that's a bit simpler. And then where can we be most successful through partnership so we don't have to have all the expertise in-house? And I think that's a really important point, is the importance of partnerships if you've got local partners you could work with. And when we talk about community, it changes over time. Over the course of our lifespans, there will be all sorts of moments when we will all need help. And being connected to the people around us helps us live independently much longer than if we are living alone. And that is a true thing. And then we need to make sure we design our project so everybody can be a part of it. All right? All right. This is the Reverend John Whitfield. He was one of our board members, and he was one of the leaders when it came to CLT advocacy in the state of Alabama, and he passed away last year. And he talked about the beloved community, and that's really what we're talking about here. And it's interesting that this quote that, and again, this is in an earlier publication of ours called Community Matters. And he's talking to a group of folks just like you who've come together, and it just is amazing. The very fact we're here together, gathered together in this session, lets me know and feel in my heart that there's still this desire to bring about an opportunity where we could see the best in each other, where we're able to celebrate achievements not only locally but throughout the globe, to realize that individuals have a desire in their hearts, minds, and spirits to see the beloved community become a reality. So I miss this guy. All right, community gardens. All right, fasten your seatbelts. Community is not just about housing. And our roots are in agriculture plus housing. All right, you all know Ebenezer Howard, am I right? Yow? He's the guy. He's the kind of the guy who got the whole Garden City movement going in England, which has actually had a huge impact in a number of ways. And that was looking at kind of an approach to cities that incorporated green space and agriculture and low-scale manufacturing, right? And community ownership of land. So our roots go way back. And if you go to our website and look at the timeline of the CLT movement, our timeline goes back thousands of years. But Ebenezer Howard and the new communities, I expect most all of you have heard of. And if you went to the CLT Roots session on Tuesday, you probably heard a lot about it. And this is really viewed as the first CLT in the United States, in Albany, Georgia. And if you've heard the name Shirley Sherrod, she was one of the founders of New Communities, and she is continuing her work through Resora, and that's something else you could look up as well. So our roots are in agriculture. We didn't start off as a housing movement. We started off as an agricultural movement. So what CLTs are involved in agriculture in the U.S.? We have some CLTs that are agriculture only. There's Boston Farms in Boston, Mass. There's Southside CLT, which is the largest one, and that's in Providence, Rhode Island. And then there's the Fideicomiso de Tierras Comunitarias para la Agricultura Sostenible. Apologies. This is a brand new one in Puerto Rico that's very exciting as well. So you could have agriculture-only CLTs. You could do agriculture plus housing. Athens CLT is really, really cool. If you're interested, you should check them out. And then Lopez CLT in Lopez Island in Washington State does fantastic stuff with housing cooperatives and agriculture. So those are two great organizations. And then there are some CLTs that do agriculture by partnering. So one of them is Dudley, and I bet you've all heard of Dudley, and they partner with the Food Project in Boston. And then the one that I work for, Madison Area CLT, where on our Troy Gardens project, we partner with an organization called Rooted, and they manage the green space areas and the agricultural programs. So for me, I'm a big fan of partnership, and it also is very cost effective, because for us at Troy Gardens, if we wanted to manage all the agricultural programs, we'd have to raise a lot of money and support multiple staff positions. Instead, do a very low-cost ground lease to another organization, and they can do the heavy lifting. So I really recommend that. But really, any CLT that does single-family housing has land for agriculture, right? So, and that could be backyard or in front yard. So if you do single-family housing, you could do agriculture. My recommendation is when you're starting out, unless you have in-house expertise when it comes to agriculture, you start off by partnering. That could be with urban agriculture, educational organizations, with community garden associations. And I'm a big fan of doing what you're best at. CLTs are great when it comes to land, and growers are good at growing, right? But most growers are bad at real estate, in my experience. And if you're looking for a good starter project, work with an existing well-run community garden where you could partner with a garden association. So you just, you raise funds to purchase the land, and maybe you don't even have to raise funds if it's public land, and you could obtain title to that land, and you execute a ground lease. Most community gardens are on very short-term ground leases if they have one at all. Typical is 5 years. Right, so the CLT could play a really important role in protecting land, because as land prices go up and up and up, community gardens will come under, people will say we could do a lot more with this land than have 30 garden plots. So anyway, and they're cool projects to work on. And this is an example project that I've been working on. It's actually with a conservation land trust, but it's one that any community land trust can do. And this is a project working with Hmong elders who are survivors of the secret war in Laos. And that's one of our elders in the garden. And when you see this person in particular walking around normally, she is hunched over and uses a cane, and then she gets into her garden plot. And this is what she's doing. So it's just remarkably healing for them to participate. And this is actually a community farm that has kind of multiple tenants that are all farmers from Southeast Asia. And in the bottom part is where we have the community garden plots for the elders. And so this is a place for growing culturally appropriate food. Agriculture and nature is a place for restoring spirits. And actually, this is part of a mental health treatment program. And these are folks with very severe PTSD. And when they go into the garden, what's triggered are happy memories. And it's a very peaceful place, and they spend a lot of time there. We have a corn harvest festival. And then we have a fall harvest picnic, and we invite donors to this conservation land trust to see the program in action and to be charmed by the elders, who are very charming people. And this is Yumo Yang, and she's the person who coordinates this program, and we've been doing this together for a few years now, and actually she runs the show, and I'm just her helper at this point. But it's an awesome project. So why bother with this? Community gardens build community cohesion as well as anything I've ever seen. You're increasing capacity of local food systems. You're improving health outcomes for your residents. It's an opportunity to grow culturally appropriate food, and it's access to affordable fresh produce. So that's the community garden section of the workshop. Any questions? Or should I just keep moving? I'm going to keep moving. All right, CLTs and condominiums. Community-oriented housing masquerading as conventional single-family ownership, right? Because when we had the Great Recession and condominiums ran into trouble, people started realizing they were connected to their neighbors, right? For the first time. So it is community-oriented housing. Multifamily housing is the future, I would say, and certainly in cities. It's a more efficient use of land, more energy efficient. Physical accessibility is easier to implement. At present, it seems that development's focused on multifamily rental, but once that market is saturated, if it is saturated, interest rates come down, maybe we'll see condos coming back. Maybe not like they were before 2007, but maybe more than they are now. All right, who's ready for some condo history? Yeah, this is more interesting than you think. All right, condominiums through the ages. All right, it goes back a long ways, right? It goes back to there's one record of a sale of part of a building in ancient Babylon. All right? Disputes were common, right? Lack of clear rules about repair and maintenance of common areas, right? Nothing's new. These have been the same disputes for, for hundreds and hundreds of years. This guy and his code provided for separate ownership of floors. Here's a question, audience participation. If you have a condo and it's 3 floors with 1 unit per floor, and you divide up ownership, who owns the first floor staircase? But it's on the first floor. Shouldn't it be the first floor? No, because it's for the benefit of the upper floors. That kind of stuff. Excellent. All right. Going the other way. After World War II, severe housing shortage. And combined with urban sprawl, create a need for more efficient use of land through multifamily buildings. And the dream shifted. Persons of modest means can no longer own a private home near the city center. So in New York City, this is the rise of high-rise cooperatives, which are still in existence today. But eventually that was outpaced by condominiums. And by 1969, every state had condominiums. One of the keys to condominiums is that there was federally guaranteed mortgage insurance for condo loans. And that's why they grew like crazy, is because it was easy to get a mortgage loan for them. They started off as affordable housing. It's really important to bring this up. It was cheaper than a single family home, and that's what drew people to it. Plus, you could live in the city. So there's this legal foundation that's really important to know about. There's this concept of divided ownership, which CLT folks are used to because we divide ownership of land and improvements. What are the responsibilities of individual unit owners versus the association? And then what do you do when things go wrong? Because they always go wrong, right? So basic concepts, fee simple ownership of the unit and an undivided tenancy in the common interests with all the unit owners. And just one thing to make clear is you hear things like vertical columns of space or from the paint inward, and that defines what is owned by each unit owner. Everything else is owned in common. Common elements. It could be common or general facilities, and there's a fractional ownership, but that can't be separated from your ownership in the unit. And there's shared expenses. Generally in CLT projects, you don't see fancy swimming pools, but it's shared expenses for parking, for the grounds, for the exterior of the building, for the stuff running through the walls, for the benefit of unit owners, that kind of things. And there's some documents, and these can be quite complex, but really important to understand. The declaration describes the condominium, the units, and the common areas, and the permitted uses of the property. And this is important because it determines who pays for what, right? So if the windows need to be replaced, who pays for that, right? And you could have a weird thing where if the unit owner owns the inside of the window and the association owns the outside, and that's a big one, because when windows wear out, who has to pay? Because that's a really big ticket item. And I've lived through that. And if you have bad condo documents, it's really bad. There's a condo plat, which is a map that shows where everything is. And then in this declaration, you have floor plans and elevations for every single unit as well. So there's a lot to this document. Then there's the bylaws. You're very familiar with bylaws, and these are really the rules that the association operates by. And that covers maintenance responsibilities, condo dues, special assessments. A special assessment is, we have to replace the roof and we didn't save enough money for it. And that's really a problem if you have affordable unit owners. voting procedures in terms of what percentage votes you need for different issues, and that kind of stuff. All right, so how do CLTs get involved with condos? CLTs could be the developer of condos, right? And so after the condo's built and people move in, what's the CLT's relationship? Well, the CLT can ground lease the land to the association. That's one lease, just to the association. The association is responsible for collecting money from everybody, so it's really quite easy to administer, right? I'm personally a big fan of this one. But in California, for townhouse-style condo developments, they like individual ground leases. Because that, number one, they could use their regular single-family ground lease with just a few modifications. They have one-on-one relationships with their homeowners. But for me, it's a lot of leases to keep track of. So if you have a 40-unit condo, option one, you have one lease. Option two, you have 40 leases. So anyway, I can't say I recommend it, but folks in California do seem to prefer this. And the other option is when you're done, is that you give everything to the condo association and you place deed restrictions or land use restrictions on it to protect affordability. I'm not a big fan of this because it's not as durable a set of protections as you would get for a ground lease. All right? And also, you don't have a basis for an ongoing connection to the association, which I think is really, really important. So where does community come in? How you structure your bylaws is really important, right? Like for big, do you require 51% vote or do you require 2/3 or 75% vote on decisions? That's a big deal because if it's a 51% vote, you could have a really divided community making a really big decision. So that's really important. And then in terms of marketing, if you're marketing condos, market it as community-oriented housing. Don't hide that. We did that with our first project in Madison, and that was a mistake. The other thing you could do is learn from co-housing, which I'll talk about in a second. Also architectural, both architectural and site design can really enhance community. For example, how do you get from the parking lot to the door of your home, right? If you can go right from that to the back door of your townhouse, you don't run into anybody. But if you have to go around a path that takes you through other people's homes into your front door, now you're facilitating community through your site plan, through your sidewalk layout. So keep that in mind. Now here's something I've done that's kind of a pain in the ass, which is giving people upgrade options. And people really appreciate it. It could just be a no-cost option like choosing flooring. It could be some no-cost cabinet choices. I don't recommend painting. Just paint, let people do colors, whatever they want. The risk is if people make choices and don't get to closing, somebody's stuck with their choices. But it makes a big difference if people could choose their counters and their flooring and what kind of wood in their cabinets. It makes a dramatic difference and it doesn't have a cost implication. And I just want to say, and this is that, generally people screw up their first project, their first time they do something in some way. And if you're doing your first condo project as a developer, you will probably screw something up. And we certainly did with our anniversary court project. I wasn't on staff, but I was on the board at the time. And for our next one, which was Troy Gardens, which we did 10 years later, we applied the lessons learned, which was err on the side of using durable materials, build it right. We took a hit on our developer fee by building it right, and I think that will pay long-term dividends. The other thing is to stay involved. If you do a condo project, don't walk away. Be an ongoing part of the condo association meetings. I'm a big believer in do their bookkeeping for them. It doesn't cost you very much. You already have a bookkeeper. And guess what? You'll see who's in arrears on their condo dues, right? And then also helping them with capital needs assessments. You know, as condos age, they're going to need all kinds of maintenance. And if you have a good capital needs assessment to work with, you could budget for it so people aren't hit with big special assessments. All right. But here may be a more, oh, is there a question? It's one of the condo, it ends up being one of the condo documents. Okay. Is the ground, sorry, yeah.
So in the case of having one ground lease for the entire condo association, does that mean anytime someone comes in or buys a unit, they're signing a new ground lease so they're aware of what they're joining? Or
Well, that would be part of the disclosure documents. Right, and different state have different disclosure document requirements, but yeah, and you definitely want people to come in with their eyes open. I'm a big believer, every CLT homeowner, home buyer should work with an attorney, particularly for a condo, because these documents, there's no way that a layperson can digest these documents unless you do that as part of your job. They're just too complex. Yes? That is such a good question. I advise that associations should never do their own books, for sure. I think in colder climates, contracting out for snow removal is a no-brainer. You know, so I think it's, you know, I think that where the CLT could be helpful is working with the association to determine what pieces should be contracted out, which ones can be self-managed, right? I've not done a project where we contracted with a third-party condo management company to do it. So, all right, CLT is an IZ partner, and this is a situation where you have a local inclusionary zoning ordinance where 15% of all new condo units need to be affordable. And the roles that CLTs can play with that. All right, so in this situation, unlike the other one where 100% of the units were CLT units, here the CLT units are a relatively small percentage. You can't protect via a ground lease unless you're doing individual, you know, I mean, generally there's just no way to protect or via ground lease, so you're doing it via deed restrictions. It's really your only option. The upside is you don't wear the risk of being a developer, and that is huge because condo projects are really complex to develop. And your role is in marketing and bringing subsidy to the table, right? So it's much less of a lift than if you're the developer. But the downside is your homeowners are always outnumbered in the association, and that could be a really big problem. All right, so say there's a vote to raise the condo dues, and CLT homeowners are only 10%, and it takes a 51% vote or a 2/3 vote. They have no voice, right? So if it's possible, if you're working with a developer who's open to this, the condo documents can say that for, you know, for increasing condo dues or special assessments, there could be a supermajority requirement that would include at least some CLT homeowners. Or another approach, which I used in my last project, is that a requirement that a majority of the IZ unit owners approve. So it's kind of like two votes, a vote of the market rate owners and a vote of the inclusionary unit owners. This is a big, big problem nationally because unless you've got something like this in place, you can get priced out of your condo by increases. And by the way, most for-profit developers lowball condo dues, and associations need to jack them over the first 5 years of the project. It's just something that happens. Something else, and Jeff Washburn mentioned it to me, is what City of Lakes has done is over-subsidize units, right? So that the purchase price is low enough so that even if there's spikes in condo dues and special assessments, the homeowners can absorb them. I think now the amount of subsidy that's needed makes it hard to over-subsidize. So anyway, if you're doing ISA units in a project, just really be thinking about how do you protect your owners from getting priced out in terms of increasing condo dues and special assessments. All right, so that was a quick trip towards condos. Oh, I just want to say, before we get to co-ops later, condos are a way weirder way to divide up ownership of property than co-ops. The only reason they're popular is financing is easy. Yeah, go ahead.
Might not be in relation to this, but what if the HOA never comes to quorum? And how have you dealt with any situations in that?
I've not. It's easier now because the way documents are written now, it enables people to participate through Zoom. So really, so if you've got folks who are out of town, they could still participate. You know, condo documents allow for proxy votes. I mean, if you just have like a profoundly dysfunctional condo association, that's why CLTs need to stay involved with condo associations. But if you're an IZ unit owner in a larger building, it's, you know, so it means for the CLT, you know, and this is true for any condo buyer, you want to vet the association before you buy a unit. That's really super important. So I don't have an easy answer to that question. So, yes?
I'm curious, have you seen a situation where it was a traditional condominium setup, but then mixed income approach in that setting? So not inclusionary zoning, but let's say the land trust is the developer, single multifamily building, but mixed use. What does that look like?
Mixed use or mixed income?
Mixed income, I'm sorry.
So the Troy Gardens project I mentioned was 2/3 affordable, 1/3 market rate, and we were the developer. And the reason, there were a couple reasons why we did that. One, we thought the market rate units would help provide an internal source of subsidy to the affordable units. And also it kept us out of the realm of Davis-Bacon. And I just gotta say, this is the dirty secret in CLTs, is that prevailing wage can kill projects financially. And so we monkey with our numbers in order to stay under the threshold. And that, I don't know, we need to talk about that at some point. But mixed income is complicated because market rate buyers are gonna want extensive upgrade options. And once you offer it to them, you need to offer it to your affordable unit buyers. So managing upgrade options was really complex. But the other thing we were told is that we couldn't sell the market rate units because market rate buyers didn't want to live with lower income folks. And it turns out that was completely untrue. And that project sold, I think, as strongly as any condo project in the county.
How did your ground lease structure work? Did you decide to own the land and then?
Yeah.
Okay, and then, okay, so if you own the land, then what, did you just apply the land trust resale formula to your affordable buyers?
We ended up using deed restrictions.
So you
For,
own the land and then deed restricted to those affordable units?
right. Right. And I mentioned earlier, if you go to troygardens.net, oh, actually, I haven't mentioned it yet, but troygardens.net has our complete set of development documents, including all the condo docs. So, yeah, and you could download them and use them. Yeah.
So in that example, is there no ground lease?
In which example? Oh, there is a ground lease in that. We were the developer as the CLT, and what we decided, we could have had all the resale restrictions embedded in the ground lease, but then we would have had to identify specific units those would be attached to in the ground lease. And we did it by deed restriction because that gave us some flexibility in determining which units would be affordable. So, but it was it's all a single ground lease to the association. But the resale price, the resale formula is embedded in deed restrictions, not in the ground lease.
Even your market rate are actually paying towards that ground lease because it's a part of their association dues.
Right, it's just part of the budget. Yeah, so you just build in the ground lease fee into the condo association budget. All right, I'm going to jump to co-housing, which is built on it's built on condominiums. CLT's I did a presentation to a co-housing network of Minnesota, trying to promote collaboration with CLTs. I've done 2 co-housing projects. I have a mixed relationship with the concept, but I think it's well worth exploring. So who here has heard of co-housing? Who here thinks it's awesome? Who's heard of it? Who here is skeptical? All right, I'm with you, the skeptical folks. But I've done 2 projects, so anyway. Wait, did I skip? Yeah. So it's a form of intentional community. When you talk to co-housing folks, they use the word intentional all the time, so get used to it. It came to the US from Denmark. It strikes a dynamic balance between personal privacy and a tight-knit sense of community. All right? It's not a legal structure. It could be applied to co-op. It could be in a rental situation, but almost all co-housing communities in the US are condominium legal structure, which is why I did condos first. And it incorporates an approach to design that facilitates community. Co-housing didn't invent that approach, by the way, but that's what's very much part of the ethos. All right, some history. All right, it started in Denmark in the 60s with a bunch of hippies, right? Who were dissatisfied with existing housing in communities. They felt that they didn't meet their needs. And I think it had something to do with folks starting families and wanting to move out of shared household cooperatives into a situation where they could have their own private household. So the first co-housing community is, I can't pronounce it. Anybody here speak Danish? No. 1972. It was open and non-dogmatic. And some co-housing communities can be a bit dogmatic, just FYI. This is the book. It's gone through many different editions. It's written by Catherine McCammon and Charles Durrett. They're still very involved in working with co-housing groups. They're based out in California. This is a great book to read if you want to be introduced to co-housing. You can find it on Amazon. And just look for the most recent edition. This one is probably an older edition. The first co-housing community in the US was Muir Commons in Davis. And I believe it was either entirely affordable or mostly affordable. And it mixed ownership units and rental units. And they were inspired by co-ops, right? So just like condos were inspired by co-ops, we have co-housing is inspired by co-ops as well. And this is a map of co-housing projects completed and co-housing projects in process. This is a few years old. If you go to the Coho US website, they have an updated map. Of those projects in process, I would guess a third at most will get built. It'll talk about why most co-housing projects are never completed. So there's defining characteristics of co-housing. One is participatory process. This is the thing that gets people most excited. You can participate in the design of your own housing. People really like that idea. Most people have never had that chance. And some common things that are in every co-housing project: clustering of units, shared open space, cars to the periphery, a common house, which I'll talk about in a second. and common facilities. So way back when co-housing started, it was about very compact units with very generous shared spaces, right? And that was just a much more efficient way to live. You could lower your housing cost based purely on design. And so there's always been this commitment. Oh man, which way am I going? Oh. All right, hang in there. I haven't used this thing for a while. Okay, good. So there's a common house. You'll hear about that. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's a separate building, but it's just an area, a community area within the project. And that will have a community kitchen. That it'll have a large multi-purpose room, right, that you could use for everybody to share a meal together. It could be used for parties. Some co-housing communities host concerts that are open to the larger community. It's a really cool concept. I love this part, guest rooms. So instead of having an extra bedroom for guests who are there a small percentage of the time, sorry, I'm gonna get trigger finger. You have shared guest spaces, right? That could work great for sleepovers. That could, you have out-of-town guests. It's really a fantastic idea. And it means instead of getting a 3-bedroom, you can get a 2-bedroom and save a big chunk on your monthly housing payment. So it's really, really, really good idea. Community workshops are common, particularly for folks who are downsizing. They have a lot of this equipment already. The last project I did, we were able to build out a workshop just based on people's existing equipment. You could also include bicycle repair to this as well. So another really good idea. Resident self-management is definitely a big thing in co-housing. Oh, I'm so sorry about that. Consensus-based decision-making. All right. I'm turning this off. All right, consensus-based decision-making. Who has experience with consensus-based decision-making? Okay, who likes it? Who is? All right. So you'll find this in pretty much every single co-housing project. And one thing that's just really important is to have some kind of a procedure. So if you can't reach consensus, you can call a vote. So one thing that worked very well for our last project is if you can't reach consensus, and then just after a certain amount of time, put it to a vote, 75% vote carries, which seems like a really high percentage, but it really works because otherwise what could happen is 1 or 2 people can hold decisions hostage. And now you start having the tyranny of the most challenging people in your community, because there are always going to be challenging people in every community. All right, just very important. All right, co-housing started with affordable housing, like I said. But that's not what it so much is anymore. A lot of the times co-housing is custom-built condos for middle and upper income households looking to live in green living in an interconnected way with people much like themselves. It's a little harsh, right? But I think it can be true. And affordability is not magically materialized, because one of the downsides of participatory design is that everybody's opinions get thrown in. People want customized units. That all just adds to the cost, adds time and cost, and that all works against affordability. Plus, co-housing groups try to do affordability on their own. They try to come up with subsidy on their own. They don't know what they're doing. They're unsuccessful. And their affordability goals wither away. So how does co-housing get developed? So the classic model is the future residents are the developers. They put together the money, right? They hire the development team. It's development by committee. That only works if you've got folks with means who could finance this process. Another approach is developer-driven. So the Troy Gardens example I mentioned was developer-driven, meant that we built a co-housing community seeking some input from potential residents, but where we were the developers. And then we hope people will come and participate. All right, and that is more common in senior-oriented co-housing. And then there's a hybrid approach, which we used at our last project in Madison. And that's where we had an organized co-housing group, and we approached a development company to partner with us in doing the project. So they brought the funding to the project. We brought the buyers to the project. And it was good in concept, but thorny in practice, because these were not experienced developers. So, but anyway, I still think it's a good concept. But co-housing takes time. The decision-making process is complex. And if you're going to partner with a co-housing group, it's really important to know that. It takes longer than conventional approaches to housing. Okay, what are the opportunities? Mixed income co-housing. Every co-housing group I've ever talked to wants to be mixed income. Every single one, all right? So they want to do it. And I think increasingly, I hope, they're open to partnering. And I taught at the National Co-housing Conference last year. And I said, I said, well, here's all it takes to subsidize a unit. And I made it sound as complex as possible in order to make the point that, why don't you partner with people who know how to do this? What makes you think you can do this? This is hard. You hire architects, you hire lawyers. Why aren't you partnering, So I think there's more openness to that, which is good. And here's the big thing. For baby boomers, here's an interesting question. Which age group most wants to live in age-segregated housing? What do you think? Young? Old? 25-year-olds, right? And so baby boomers, and this is something that AARP has done a lot of work on, is that many, I don't know if it's most, many baby boomers want to live in age-diverse housing, right? My 91-year-old mother doesn't want to live with 91-year-olds, right? She would much rather live with younger folks. So if we want to provide housing to folks as they age, we need to be thinking in terms of age-diverse models of housing. The other thing is that elders living in co-housing can live independently longer than if they were living in conventional multifamily housing. And that is a very true thing. And that could be somebody to help with groceries, somebody to help if you're rehabbing. Elders can be surrogate grandparents as well. So as a multi-generational model, actually co-housing is working really well right now. All right, but what are the challenges of co-housing? Expertise in development. Some co-housing groups try to do development themselves, and that's why most co-housing projects fail, in my opinion. So whenever anybody called me about co-housing, I would ask them who their development team is. Who's your architect? Who's your lawyer? Right? Who are you working with? Who knows this stuff? So anyway, if you're in a conversation with a co-housing community, you want to ask who's on their development team. That's really super important. Diversity is a big issue. There's age diversity, and I think good diversity when it comes with folks with disabilities, but co-housing has fallen short when it comes to racial, cultural, and income diversity, as has lots of other types of housing. But this is something co-housing is wrestling with. The time commitment to be involved in a co-housing project is extreme. They have a lot of meetings, right? And you gotta like meetings to like co-housing. That's just a true thing. And then affordability. Unless you've got a strong nonprofit partner or public subsidy, you won't have affordability. All right, here's a question. Actually, Jeff Washburn mentioned this. Some co-housing groups have a committee that approves members. And I think it's a terrible idea. It's just a fair housing complaint waiting to happen. Here's the other true thing. The people who you think are going to be the best could end up being the biggest pains in the butt. I've seen this. And some people who are super thorny at first are great, right? So not only is it a fair housing problem, it's not that effective. And guess what? You're always going to have thorny people in any community, always. So the approach I've used that's worked quite well is you do a great job with orientation. Folks go to workshops, they attend meetings. You could have a buddy program. You give them really good reading materials, and then they decide for themselves if it's a good fit. And that works well, and it eliminates the issue of fair housing. Here's the biggest thing. Co-housing groups can be very complicated to partner with. So for our last project, what we did, we had one person who was the point of contact, and that was me. And so when it came to meetings with architects, development partners, attorneys, I was able to represent the group. I would report back. I wouldn't do anything I wasn't authorized to do. And it made us coherent to partner with. But if we made our partners go to all the co-housing group, committee meetings, they would have run for the hills. So when you're looking to if you're looking to partner, ask for a single point of contact who's authorized to negotiate. That's just really super duper important. All right. How could CLT, so why bother? Why should CLTs even think about something as complicated as this, right? Well, we have some shared values. We have a shared emphasis on community. Co-housing defines it a little differently in a more inwardly turned way, whereas CLTs think of community in a more expansive way. CLTs are, we do some participatory development. We like to give the neighborhood a voice, right? Our residents certainly have a voice in the types of projects that we choose to do, right? And CLTs we're into sustainability, right? Universal design housing for the lifespan, I call that sustainability. Affordability, I call that sustainability. And green building, right? So we have these shared values, but there's just been very little in the way of partnering. We've had Madison, we've had, I think Bellingham, Washington, and I'm not sure where else, right? So how could we do it? All right, well, a CLT could be a developer, and this was a project I was deeply involved in. Here's your co-housing down here, 30 units of mixed income co-housing, condominium, 5-acre community garden, 5-acre restored prairie, and a 5-acre CSA farm. And this is a whole nother workshop to talk about that. And this is the only one that I know of that a CLT has developed ever in the US. It took us 8 years from when we began conversations until the final units were completed. And in the 15 years since, nobody else has tried it, even though it got a lot of attention and won awards. It's complicated to do these projects. And here's the case study. If you just want to see how we did it, you could find, we have architectural drawings, we have all the condo docs, we have the ground lease, we have, sample deed restrictions, so you can really get a sense. You can't just use those documents just because you need to adapt them for your community and your legal context. But anyway, I don't recommend this. But you could partner around the affordable units, right? And this is just like IZ that we talked about before. Very, very simple, right? Except for a few wrinkles. CLTs can identify buyers, and you could certify them for income and asset eligibility. Here's the one thing, is that before buyers are identified, CLT could serve as the proxy for future owners of those units, right? So if it's going to take 5 years to do this project, during the first 3 years where it's being designed, if the CLT is going to be doing 5 units, the CLT could be the proxy for those 5 units and participate in the design process and that kind of thing. And then you bundle the subsidy for each affordable unit, just like you would in any IZ setting. And then you serve as a long-term steward, just as you would in any IZ setting, right? So if you're doing IZ units and condominiums, it's not a huge stretch to do that in a co-housing context, if you're interested. But even if you don't want to do co-housing, there's good ideas you could borrow. The idea of collaborative design, for example, the CLT in Brussels, Belgium, they involve future residents in their rental projects in the design process. And they've had to refine that just to make it a more time-efficient process. But they're involved in some architectural decisions and also in the design of governance documents for these projects. So I do think any way you could involve future residents in design decisions in an efficient way is a really good idea. Designing for community, co-housing didn't invent this. There's a book from the 70s called Housing as If People Mattered. You can find it on Amazon. It's a great book. It's all black and white, you know, but it's great. It's a great book. You know, the other thing is focus on thoughtful governance documents. So if you're doing a condo project, for example, be really thoughtful about your bylaws and declaration. Don't just let your attorney do whatever. Really dig into it, right? Because this is how the community is going to govern itself, how it's going to resolve disputes, et cetera. And then in terms of building a sense of community, one of the best things about co-housing is the community comes together before people move in. So people are ready to run their community from the day they move in. And that's a really big deal versus you have a condominium community where people move in, and once you pass a certain threshold and the developer steps out, now you've got a group of people who don't know each other and have never worked together, somehow making decisions for the condominium. So that's co-housing. So who wants to partner in a co-housing project now? No, well, you know, what I would say is that you're a little better equipped to have a conversation, maybe, right? So I think it's worth a conversation. Some groups have their act together, some groups do not. If it's a group that really has their act together, they have a development team, and they've secured land, that's worth spending some time on. If they don't have a site yet and they don't have a development team, probably not. All right. Okay, so we have a choice here. I could power through housing co-ops and then get to community pubs. You ready? Should we do some co-ops? All right. So my knowledge of co-ops, I have not done them. So if you ask me questions, I won't have as good answers. But I did work with the California CLT network on their model housing co-op ground lease. So I learned a bit about it. I have a little bit of skepticism about housing co-ops being feasible, but I hear there's some real interest in Minnesota in doing CLT housing co-op projects. So I don't want to in any way talk you out of it. The big issue is how do you get the financing to do these projects? And if you solve that riddle, and then you're in good shape. All right, so there's kind of two ways to do co-ops. Market rate, which is how they do, that's in New York City and the Dakota, where Richard Nixon didn't get in, but John Lennon did, I think. So there's no resale price control. It's all private. It's structured differently than a condominium, but similar pricing and that kind of thing. And then there's below market rate cooperatives, and these are what we would call limited equity or zero equity co-ops, and that's where we're going to be focused today. So market rate co-ops, this is the Dakota. When you buy a co-op unit, you're not buying a unit, you're buying a share in a corporation, and that share gives you the right to occupy a unit. So it's really a very conventional way of ownership, right? It's a corporate ownership. Not nearly as weird as condominiums. There's no limit on how much you could sell your home for. It's very common in New York, particularly for conversions of rental buildings. But kind of new construction, I think in New York is pretty much all condos at this point in time. All right, so limited equity co-ops. This is from the Lopez Community Land Trust on Lopez Island. So what's the purpose? You want to prevent gentrification, encourage long-term residency, promote affordability, targeted to low and moderate income families. This is all right in the sweet spot of community land trusts. And I totally recommend you check out Lopez CLT's website. They do fantastic work. There's some variability in terms of what the share price is. How much do you need to pay to buy into the co-op? In a zero equity situation, it's a very small amount of money. Lopez CLT, it's higher, but the goal at Lopez was they set their share price so you wouldn't have to go to a bank to borrow money in order to do it. But it was high enough so you took it seriously. And I think over time, Lopez even developed their own internal revolving loan fund to also, so folks can borrow for purchasing their shares. I don't have off the top of my head, but their website would have all that information. And then when it's time to sell your share, there's a resale formula attached to that, right? So far, this is all really good fit, right? And again, this is the non-equity or zero equity. Investment is modest. You get a refundable membership fee, and you would really see this very commonly in student co-ops. And some what are called Section 202 senior housing co-ops as well. All right, so how do CLTs do housing co-ops? All right. In terms of new construction, as far as I know, there's just two, Champlain Housing Trust. If you've never studied them, you want to just study them because they are quite impressive. They do almost everything a CLT can do, except for conservation and urban agriculture. They do commercial development, rental, co-ops. I don't know if they have co-housing. They might have I don't think they do co-housing. But anyway, the Rose Bakery Co-op is Rose Street Bakery Co-op. Super cool live-work space for artists. So you definitely want to check them out. And then Lopez Community Land Trust. In the Bay Area, there's been a lot of activity with existing co-ops joining CLTs. And essentially the way they would join is the CLT purchases the land and then executes a ground lease back with the co-op. And I think that's a very promising strategy in areas where you have existing co-ops. And then there's co-op conversion of multifamily rental. And there's really strong interest among Los Angeles CLTs in this. I'm not sure where it's going to go. And I'll talk a bit more about the challenges of that in a second. Okay, so why do people want to do co-ops? You don't want to be a landlord, which I don't think is a good enough reason, right? But that is definitely motivating some folks. Say, I just don't want to be a conventional landlord. There's the benefit of resident sharing and management responsibilities that lightens the stewardship burden for CLT as compared to conventional rental. And co-ops give residents a sense of ownership, which does lead to folks taking better care of buildings and greater longevity of tenure. You know, and those are two really good things. But financing is a big challenge outside of New York City and the Bay Area, particularly if the co-op itself owns the building. How that co-op is going to get financing is a super duper big challenge. And that's where a lot of cooperative projects stall out, is an inability to obtain financing. I hear there might be some interest in doing some legislative stuff in Minnesota to enable housing cooperatives. So I would definitely stay tuned for that. And then in the case of a co-op conversion, say you all are living in an existing apartment building and the CLT buys it from the crappy landlord. Now we're your new landlord, and we're not going to raise your rent, and we're going to have responsible management. And then we say, yeah, and then if you want, you can own your own building and have all the responsibilities of management for the same monthly housing fee, all right? I don't know, right? So unless folks are really motivated to want to self-manage, co-op conversions can be tricky, you know.
Sorry, but the benefit is that they would be a shareholder. How are,
Oh, okay, so this would be what I call like a leaseholder co-op. So it would be multifamily rental owned by the CLT, and when it converts to a co-op, CLT would lease the improvements and the land to the co-op. One lease. And then the co-op is responsible for managing itself, internally collecting rent, paying it to the CLT.
what's a governance? Your ownership is governance. You're not owning. Yeah.
In that situation, you can create something where people have an actual ownership interest, but then there needs to be some kind of an increased share price for folks to buy into it, which might be a barrier if you're serving low-income folks. So, I mean, that's a really good question.
Sorry, but are you, if you're not in the, if are you buying into a co-op as a renter if you're not expecting equity back? Or you're a renter who's,
Well, in the situation, for example, in Los Angeles, you have an apartment building that goes from multifamily rental, and then it flips to one lease to this new corporation, which is going to be the housing cooperative. And then the housing cooperative manages itself, and there may not be any money exchanged in that transaction. Well, right, and I have to admit, my knowledge is okay. So others are more expert than I am on this. So I have to admit, I had this epiphany during lunch talking to somebody, and because in this presentation I said, oh well, after the rental market crashes, condos will come back, but they're going to come back at such a high price point, right? That it's not going to work the way it worked 12 years ago, right, for CLTs. So maybe co-ops are our future, and maybe my perspective is overly pessimistic, right? So I would say listen to her about this, because I think it's, and this book that we're going to be revising here, we're going to include kind of a thoughtful treatment of CLTs and housing cooperatives, I hope, in this, because I think co-ops might be our future, and we need to crack that nut of financing so folks can do them. So anyway, I do want to just quickly touch on a couple things. In working with housing cooperatives, you do need to make a commitment to orienting new members, not just in the beginning, but each time somebody new comes in. So that's an ongoing commitment, and the folks at Champlain Housing Trust certainly have talked about that. And then also, if a co-op is responsible for maintenance and it's not being done properly, how is the CLT going to step in and take care of that? Or I think the way Champlain does it in their leasehold co-ops, where they lease the building and the land, part of that arrangement requires the co-op to contract with Champlain Housing Trust for certain management elements. And I think that could be a very good model as well. Really small co-ops could be a challenge, because if you've got 10 folks in your co-op and everybody's super committed, and then 10 years later, people have turned over and not everybody's committed, you don't have enough people to do the work. And so that's one risk for small co-ops. And that ties to the risk of the second and third generation members who may not have the same fervor or commitment as the initial folks. So that would be great. She's great. And she actually knows what she's talking. I know about the other stuff in this presentation, but not so much about co-ops. So, yeah.
I know you just said that, but I'm going to ask more questions.
Okay.
The financing one,
Yeah.
in particular where the co-op owns the improvements, can you just explain that?
Well, just think about this. This is a co-op made of folks who are low to moderate income that are going to a lender asking them to finance this expensive property that they're going to own collectively and self-manage, versus the CLT is this established development entity that would own the land and the improvements, who lenders have dealt with many times in the past. So I think they have a very different risk profile in that sense. So, well, I mean, I think one path to resident ownership of the improvements is to set it up as a leasehold co-op first. And then once it has a track record and it's got stable management, and then at that point, transfer ownership to the residents. At that point, once you have a track record and you have a lender who's already involved in the project, I think that might be a more feasible way, because it's a smaller step for the lender. I can't say that I have. Doesn't mean it's not a good idea. All right. I want to jump ahead to something less complicated. The community pub. And I love this one. And the point of this is that CLTs could do a variety of things, right? It's not just about housing. It's not just about urban agriculture. It's really could do whatever the community feels is important, right? And also this is a story of, we ended up doing something really different than what we set out to do. This is the Butcher Arms in Levenet Community Pub. I think that's the name of the town. All right. And for this CLT, the success of their housing project hinged on saving the village pub. They set out to build affordable housing, but really to do that, they had to save a pub first. And a pub is a third place, just like a community gardens. And this pub was the center of this village. And without it, the village would have lost its heart. So David Graham was the president of this community land trust. And if you go to their website, you just have all these pages of as told by David Graham, and they're super funny. And so they start off in 2009, focused on affordable housing, and then they beavered away on the housing project, as he said. And then suddenly there was a groundswell of noise from the community. It's like, the housing's going well, but could you do something about the pub? And the pub closed, with the community doing their best to drink the place dry. And this only added to the pressure, right? So their focus shifted from this affordable housing project to saving the pub. So they formed an exploratory group made up of 6 of the 10 members of the Housing Trust, and they needed to do research, come back with an idea and test resolve. So they went to another cooperative pub, sucking up every bit of information as well as sampling their hospitality. And they were working on the basis that if there was no commitment, we could drop the idea and focus solely on our housing scheme. But over 100 people turned up at the meeting to hear the cooperative proposal, and they had 50 people pledging 1,500 pounds each. So they were in motion. And they saved the pub, the Butcher's Arms. And you can no longer buy shares, unfortunately. But John Davis has shares in the community pub. And it's a free house with seating for over 50 in the dining and the bar. And it has upstairs self-service coffee lounge and outside seating area. And has an excellent reputation for food, drink, and customer service. At least, so they say themselves, right? And by the way, they have somebody else manage the pub for them. Another example of partnering, right? You don't have to develop pub expertise. You could work with a partner who is a pub expert. All right, and just a few things to tie it up. So collaborative design. It's a core element of co-housing. Whether you do co-housing or not, it's a really good thing to think about. Design refers to architecture, it refers to site planning, but it also refers to governance documents. So if you're doing multifamily housing projects, really think through the issue of governance as best you can. And if folks can participate in the design process, you know, think about what works well both architecturally and in terms of building group cohesion. For some decisions, which may not benefit from group participation, the decision itself, the fact that it builds group cohesion, you make it a group decision. But collaboration adds time, complexity, and cost, so that's something else to factor in. But it pays off over the long term because people are much more invested in the place that they live. And then I haven't talked about community organizing before, but community organizing is woven through all of this stuff, right? We need to find ways to include members of the neighborhoods in which our projects are located. Community is not just the people who live in our housing. And organizing is the method we use to build cohesive communities in combination with thoughtful design of buildings and governance mechanisms. In all our work, we're thinking in terms of 7 generations. I don't know, I find that really helpful for myself. Who will live in these homes? Who will garden in this land? And within each generation, we're thinking in terms of birth through old age, with shifting abilities and needs for supports. And these values serve as our touchstone for our work. If we hold tight to them, they'll take us in good directions. All right. Thanks. And back to housing cooperatives. I wish I had kind of had my epiphany 2 days ago instead of immediately before this workshop, but I'm going to revisit my thinking on co-ops because they might be our future. They really might be our future when it comes to multifamily. So, all right. Well, thank you all for your great questions and for coming.